Hello, I'm Joe from Cole's Music, here to talk about a couple of important things you might want to know about your Woodwind mouthpiece. First of all, the parts of the mouthpiece. This opening here is called the window. Now around that window is the rails. Now on either side, we just call those the side rails, and across the top, that's called the tip rail. Now what's very important about those side rails and those tip rails is they have to be absolutely even and smooth. So if your mouthpiece has any scratches or chips on those side rails, and especially the tip rail, it's time to replace that mouthpiece because it's not behaving the way it's supposed to. Another important part of the mouthpiece is the table. Now that table is supposed to be perfectly flat so that when you put the reed on the table, there's a seal that air doesn't leak underneath the reed. Often you'll see mouthpieces where there's dents or scratches on that table, and that mouthpiece is no good anymore. Now, the other thing that can happen to that table is the mouthpiece can warp. In essence, it twists slightly, which means that table is no longer level. Now, there's several ways that could happen, but the most common is somebody tries to wash the mouthpiece in hot water. That's the last thing you want to do, because the hot water will soften the material and make it twist. Another thing that sometimes happens is if you're playing outdoors in the summertime in the sun, because the mouthpiece is a dark material, it'll absorb the heat from the sun, and sometimes it can get overheated, and that'll also warp that table. Now, how do you know if the table's warped? Well, that's pretty easy. If you're playing and you take your reed off when you're finished playing and you see a trail of water down either side of that table, that's an indication that that table might be warped. Now, that's not always the table. Sometimes reeds warp from drying out and getting wet and drying out and getting wet. And so the way to test that it's not the table and the mouthpiece and that it's the reed is just try several reeds. If you get the same result with several reeds, that's a good indication that it's probably your mouthpiece. Another thing that I always say to check out is the ligature, because ligatures get bent, they bend very easily, or they get worn, and it's not holding the reed evenly onto the table. So that could be the problem too. So before I replace a mouthpiece, the first thing I would do is try several reeds and maybe a couple of ligatures to see how that works. The other thing is I commonly see when people wash a mouthpiece, they scrub too hard on these rails. The curvature on each of the side rails is supposed to be identical. If you rub these rails too much, you're taking material off and you're actually going to change that curvature, and usually resulting in a lot of squeaks, or sometimes you'll notice your embouchure gets tired very easily when playing, and assuming that you're playing correctly, a lot of times that could be the mouthpiece, because your lips on one side are tightening up, trying to make the feel of the curvature identical on both sides. So there's some things about a mouthpiece and how to take care of it. And in another video, I'll talk about how to choose a mouthpiece.